Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, is with us. Actually, Dr. Abbinnett, we had a university picnic today, so we all are. We all have spent the entire day in the picnic spot.
Okay.
Yes. Hello and welcome. I'm Sukhendu Das, speaking on behalf of Center for Research in Posthumanities. It's my pleasure to introduce our honorable speaker today. Dr. Ross Abbinnett is senior lecturer in social and political theory at the University of Birmingham, UK. He is the author of Truth and Social Science, Culture and Identity, Marxism After Modernity, Politics of Happiness, Thought of Bernard Stiegler, Truth and Social Science from Hegel to Deconstruction, Politics, Technology, and Social Transformation. Apart from this, he has contributed numerous articles in well-known journal and also contributed book chapters to many well-known edited volumes. And he has many forthcoming books. At least I have counted 4 or 5 forthcoming books. His work lies on the intersection of 3 intellectual traditions: recent continental philosophy, particularly Levinas, Derrida, Baudrillard, and Stiegler; German idealism, especially Kant and Hegel; and the Frankfurt School critique of culture, technology, and capitalization. His work is located in the critical tradition of social theory that begin with the Frankfurt School. This tradition is concerned with reinterpreting Enlightenment ideals of freedom, subjectivity, culture, ethics in the light of the social, economic, and technological trajectories of human society. His most recent research has focused on 4 areas. First, social implications of technology. Second, media, culture, and identity. Third, politics and sociology of happiness. Fourth, global ethics and cosmopolitanism. He has developed an internationally recognized body of research that has focused on the relationship between contemporary critical thought and the social, political, and technological revolution of modernity. Now, I would request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Devnarayan Bandyopadhyay. He is our mentor, and he is the man behind the center. I invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Devnarayan Bandyopadhyay, to share his thoughts on this event. Sir.
Thank you very much, Sukhendu. I do welcome Dr. Ross Abbinnett to this virtual platform of Bankura University. And I am really overwhelmed by the kind of range that his knowledge represents. I have been given some ideas regarding his achievements by Sukhendu Das, and I was also reading one of his books, which I came across through Sukhendu. This is Media, Culture, and Critic. And I've been trying to read this book very seriously. And I believe that I'll be able to learn so many things from his lecture, because it actually takes over many different, contentious areas like the politics of stupidity, as well as the information economy, how they interact with each other and how we make sense of the idea of politics and our contemporary social situation. So I'm really grateful to Dr. Ross Abbinnett for having agreed to talk to us. So thank you very much. And I welcome Dr. Ross Abbinnett to this virtual platform, but I believe that he will find some time for us to come to our university It's an open invitation, standing invitation to you. Whenever you find time, you please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Shukendu, for arranging this event. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your kind words. Now, I would request our registrar, Dr. Saurabh Datta, to share his thoughts with us. Dr. Saurabh Datta is our registrar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Shukendu Das. And most importantly, Dr. Ross Abbinnett from the family of Bankura University. I wholeheartedly, I'm repeating, I wholeheartedly welcome Dr. Ross Abbinnett to this virtual event. As my sir pointed out, as the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bankura University, sir pointed out that the open invitation to Dr. Ross Abbinnett to physically visit Bankura University is on. So this is up to you, Dr. Ross Abbinnett. When you will be getting the time, please let us know. And definitely at that case, the stage would be yours for face-to-face interaction, for direct interaction with the audience. But having said that, we cannot ignore the importance of this event. Yes, as my anchor brother told, that throughout the day, we spent in a picnic, but we had in our mind that at the end of the picnic in the evening, it's going to be a fantastic virtual event, Dr. Ross Abbinnett, and we were really waiting for this event. You are the associate professor in sociology, social policy, and criminology in University of Birmingham. And today, your speech is going to be on the politics of stupidity, reflection and desire in Stiegler's critique of the information economy. So definitely, we are eagerly waiting for that. And one thing I want to add, Dr. Abbinnett, that this session is being recorded. So I can assure you that whenever this session would be over, the process would be on to upload it in the social media, especially in the YouTube. And I can assure you, being the registrar of this university, that this will reach to many, many audience. So it's going to be a real asset. It's going to be a real collection, this presentation for the family of Bankura University, for this Center for Research in Posthumanities, Bankura University. I will not take much time because everybody is waiting for your speech. Before I end, Dr. Ross Abbinnett, I shall be telling from my heart, from the core of my heart, that please treat us as your real well-wisher. I wish you all the very best in your professional, in your personal, in your family life in the days ahead of you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ross Abbinnett. It's a great place for us. It's a great platform for us to listen to you. And please, the stage would be yours after a couple of minutes. So on behalf of Bankura University, I express the wholehearted gratefulness to you for this event. So thank you, Dr. Ross Abbinnett. Now it's over to my anchor brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Datta, for joining us. Now, Dr. Abbinnett will be speaking on the politics of stupidity, reflection, and desire in Stiegler's critique of the information economy. Dr. Abbinnett, I again, in Indian style, welcome you to this virtual platform, to my university. And Dr. Shubhadeep Pal is also with us. Together, we coordinate this center. So the entire stage is now all yours.
Well, thank you so much. I'm completely overwhelmed. Please do call me Ross. I would prefer that. Well, I'm really grateful that you invited me to come to give this talk. And yeah, it's my absolute pleasure to do so. I'm just sorry I missed the picnic. That sounds like it was very nice. Okay. So I'll dive in and just and start to start the paper. Well, thank you, as I say, thank you for inviting me. It really is a great opportunity for me to speak and to get a wider kind of audience for my work, and the work in particular that I've done on Bernard Stiegler's philosophy. Obviously, I gather from from the flyers that you sent and the communications that I've had with Sukhendo is that the conference is designed around a kind of memorial for three of the, perhaps the last wave of that great wave of French critical theorists that emerged in the 1960s with people like Jean Baudrillard, Jacques Derrida, Julia Kristeva, all of the people that we associate with that style of French critical theory. And obviously in the last couple of years, Bruno, Latour, Jean-Luc and Bernard Stiegler have all died under varying circumstances. And so obviously something like this is always tinged with a degree of sadness because it's a sort of memorial to their work, but it also provides us with an opportunity to reflect on what they've done, the contributions that they've made, and how they've affected the practice of social theory, which I think is, in a very profound way. In terms of what I want to do today, the paper that I'm going to present is one that I wrote a few years ago, and I've kind of revisited over the last few months. And this again provides me with an opportunity to put it in front of an audience and see what people think of it. It's a paper that I wrote 6 or 7 years ago, but my current interest is really in trying to theorize the rise of the new right, fascist parties or proto-fascist parties that are starting to attract mainstream support in Western European democracies. And that links up quite nicely with this idea of the politics of stupidity that Stiegler talks about in a number of his works on the decadence of Western democracies. So I want to say a little bit about that. So I've kind of modified the old paper so that there is a little bit of a concentration on stupidity and its relationship to the reemergence of right-wing politics, a kind of proto-fascist politics in European democracies. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. And there is an actual example of this in Stiegler's work himself in one of his books that he published in 2004, a book called The Decadence of Industrial Democracies. He actually talks about Le Choc, the fact that Jean-Marie Le Pen made it through to the second round of the French presidential elections in 2002. And this was a genuine shock in French society and in Europe in general, was that an overtly fascist party, a racist party, was able to attract so many votes and to make it through to the second round of the presidential runoff was a genuine shock. A country that has a proud kind of left-wing tradition. And a number of the newspapers there were genuinely outraged that this could have happened in France, in a liberal democracy in France. And he talked in that book. He uses this occurrence, this event of a fascist party after everything that happened in Europe, in the Second World War and the Holocaust, how a fascist party could actually attract this level of mainstream support. And one of the things he talks about is the way this is related to a certain decadence that has emerged in Western liberal democracies, which is linked to the way in which virtual and communications technologies have eroded civil society, have eroded the political, ethical, moral culture of civil society in European democracies. And he makes the point that that this is a kind of turning point where we have to engage with the question of exactly why these kind of parties have managed to attract this kind of support, and what the transformation in the culture of civil society, the transformation in subjectivity of citizens, how that has produced this kind of shocking event of a large scale, 17.5% people who voted for this fascist party, the National Front, which is now the National Rally in France. So there's a kind of example of this in Stiegler's work himself, about the relationship between decadence, the erosion of civil society through communications technologies, the decay of political culture, and the emergence of a kind of political stupidity that for him is important in trying to explain why these parties have become so popular and have become able to enter into mainstream politics. So that's kind of the peg that I'm going to hang the paper on, is the emergence of this political stupidity and the kind of party political significance that it has, and what also it tells us about the erosion of political culture in Western democracies. The paper is really divided into 5 parts, and I've kind of modified it a bit more because you've been very generous with the amount of time that you've given me to speak, an hour or so. So I can say a bit more. I've extended the paper a bit so that it includes a more general account of Stiegler's philosophy. So the first part of the paper is really to look at looks at Stiegler's work on originary technicity, which really is the kind of the founding idea, which is the basis of all his work on political decadence, on the effects of media technology, on the erosion of political culture, on what we have become as reflexive subjects, etc., etc. His whole exposition is really founded upon this idea of originary technicity, which he develops in the 3 published volumes of Technics and Time, which he published between, I think it was 1998 and 2011. So I want to say a little bit about that and how it impacts upon this idea of the politics of stupidity. So that's the first section of the paper. The second bit is really concerned with the relationship between capitalism and new forms of media and communications technology, and how that's brought us to a new phase of capitalism, a new globalized phase of capitalism, a new mode in which capital turns over, and a new way in which human beings are actually related to the process of capitalization itself. So I'll say a bit about that in the second section. The third section is really about the emergence of this kind of politics of stupidity in hyper-industrial societies. And that's very much concerned with the shift that has taken place, and which he registers in his work, the shift that's taken place between analog technologies and digital technologies. And in a sense, what I'll look at is the idea that there's a kind of genealogy in the way in which this treatment of media and communications technology evolves in social theory. So with the Frankfurt School, you get kind of Horkheimer and Adorno, who look at the culture industries that emerge from film technology, and then later you get this tradition of critique of the media kind of moves to Jean Baudrillard's work on the effects of television and the emergence of hyperreality. And then obviously Stiegler is the next phase, where he's the theorist who really looks in detail at the impact of the digital regime, of this kind of highly immersive technology, virtual tech, which takes us into and stages reality for us. So I want to look at the effects of that on this idea of the politics of stupidity. The fourth section is really about the way out. Obviously, traditionally, critical theory has been very good at diagnosing the maladies that arise from this kind of increasingly tight relationship between capitalization, the decline of political culture, the erosion of subjectivity, and the emergence of things like fascist movements, etc. So it's been very good at diagnosing the problems that have emerged from this increasingly tight relationship between capital and the media. But one of the difficulties with it has always been trying to discern some kind of way out, some kind of cracks in the totality that allow for some form of significant political resistance. And Stiegler obviously does have that, and this kind of gesture of faith that he has comes in his involvement with a movement which I'm sure you're aware of, called Ars Industrialis, which he jointly founded in 2004, I think it was, which is a project that was designed to encourage people to produce a kind of testamentary art, an art that is an attestation of the fate of culture in societies, the kind of trauma that it causes people, the idea that human beings can never be turned into cogs in a machine, that the process of reification, or in Stiegler's terms, the process by which we are integrated into these systems which utilize us as forms of capital, this process is a traumatic one. It's never able to complete itself in a way which means that our experience of it is completely neutral. For him, there is always this element of trauma that's involved in it, and that his solicitation of artistic creativity is something as an attempt to register the trauma that is produced by these systems. So I want to have a look at that, to look at exactly what he means by this and how this movement of art industrialis plays into that. And then finally, what I want to do is just to look at Stiegler's legacy, really, because his work is like all very seminal writers. His work has provoked a number of different reactions from a number of different quarters. And what I want to do is just to finish off by saying a little bit about how his work has been received. Some people have regarded his work as extremely conservative, as trying to preserve certain bulwarks against this process of being constantly swept up in, human beings being constantly hyper-exploited by these kind of information and communication technologies, and that for him, the kind of gesture we need to make is a conservative one about trying to erect bulwarks around institutions like the family to make sure that there is some kind of primary socialization that is outside of the sphere of information communications technologies. So there are a number of people who want to suggest that he is a kind of conservative writer. But there are others who want to suggest that actually his critique is much more subtle than that, and that to place him in that particular camp is to really ignore what the subtlety of his arguments are, and what it is he means by conservatism. So I'll have a look at the various ways in which his work has been received, what his legacy is as part of this process of memorialization. Okay, so that's the agenda. That's the agenda. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to look at in the paper. So I'll start off then by looking at Stiegler's ideas on origin and technicity. I'll just say a little bit about these because, as I say, there is a sense in which the whole structure of his work, everything he's interested in, all of the kind of critiques that he's pursued in his work around individualization, around culture, around sublimation, around the effects of information and digital technologies. All of these things proceed from this idea of originary technicity. And I just want to say a little bit about what he means by it, or at least what I think he means by it. Yeah, as I say, the idea is developed in detail throughout the 3 volumes of Techniques and Time that he published during his lifetime. There's an odd kind of projection that goes on in the work that he produced after he finished the 3rd volume of Techniques and Time, where he promises a number of new volumes. I think, you know, up to about 6 or 7. I honestly don't know whether they've been published in French or not. But at the moment, the ones that are published in English just go from 1 to 3. And so what I'll do is I'll try and reconstruct this idea of originary technicity from, particularly volume 1. I mean, constraints of time means that I don't really have, I can't really do we could do a whole session on this if we had the time, but I'll try and reconstruct the argument from volume 1, because it's here that he really does dig into what this idea of originary technicity actually means. There's a similarity between Stiegler's work and Derrida's in the sense that both of them develop their ideas through complex and close readings of other philosophers. And so you could reconstruct the idea of originary technicity through Stiegler's readings of a whole variety of different thinkers. So he talks a lot about Edmund Husserl's work on intentionality. He talks about Leroy Goron's work on gesture and speech. He talks about Gilbert Simondon's work about the way in which human beings are related to the kind of regimes of technological production. There's a whole range of authors that he uses to expound this idea of original technicity. But the one I'm going to use, because I know this author's work better than the others, really, and also because I think it does give a particularly concise illustration of what he means by original technicity, is Martin Heidegger's work on Dasein. The idea of Dasein that he develops in Being and Time, because what Stiegler says, one of the ideas that he tries to develop is an idea of technological Dasein, and I'll just say a little bit about that. Heidegger gives his most concise account of Dasein, what he means by Dasein in Being and Time, which is his first major book. It's his thesis, which is turned into a book. It's published in 1926. And what he argues is, what he tries to do in the book is to present an idea of the fundamental ontology of what we are as human beings. And what he wants to suggest about that is that what makes us unique as human beings is the fact that we have an experience of what he calls thrownness, of being thrown into the world. There's an idea that the primordial structure of self-consciousness is this idea that we've been thrown into something that is not part of us. We've been ejected into a world that is not an intrinsic part of our own consciousness. And the idea is that this is the founding structure of what individuates us as human beings, which makes us an individual. He says that this experience of thrownness manifests itself to us in our experiences as what he calls care. And what he wants to suggest is that we as human beings are the only type of beings who have a care for the way in which we exist. Other things, rocks, any kind of other entity does not possess that. Not even animals. We're the only ones who actually have this articulate sense of care for our own existence. And this is something that is, this basic structure is something that is also the foundation of what he understands as authenticity. Because there's an idea that if you have this sense of being responsible for your own existence, and if you have this sense of your own finitude, what he calls being towards death, the idea that you know that at some point you must die, there's a sense that we try to live, or we ought to try to live, an authentic existence. We ought to try not to get lost in the structures of what he calls the they, or Mitsein, or being with others. What he wants to say is that this experience of death is something which is disturbing. It's disturbing in the sense that it's so profoundly disturbing that some people, in fact, most people in general, will seek to live a life that is turned away from that, to get involved with the kind of minutiae of everyday life, and just to kind of get through without really reflecting on the fact that eventually you have to die. But what Heidegger's great thing is that you have to take hold of your existence, realize that it's a finite thing, and try and make something significant of your life. Now, what Stiegler wants to say about this relationship is this idea of an originary condition, an originary sense of care, of thrownness that defines what Heidegger calls Dasein, being there, is that for him, the very possibility of that kind of consciousness existing depends upon a primordial relationship that exists between human beings and technology. That's his point. His idea is that from the very beginning of from the absolute onset of human history, of humanity as a species, there is a relationship that exists between human beings and technology. And his argument is basically that if you go back 3.6 million years and you go to the Olduvai Gorge, where the first pre-hominid species were discovered by Mary Leakey in 1959, there's an idea that they were identified as proto-humans because surrounding all the remains of this strange little being called Zinjanthropus, or later on Australopithecus, was the fact that they were surrounded by sharpened flint stones. So the idea was that they were proto-humans because they were able to manipulate these sharpened stones as tools or weapons. So there's an idea that the evolution of the kind of being that we are begins with this relationship between tools and the ability of this creature, Australopithecus, to manipulate them. And so the idea is that, in a sense, what Stiegler is talking about is a kind of anthropology that predates this structure of Dasein that Heidegger is talking about. Now, the reason why this is important is because the evolution of human beings towards what we become when we become Homo sapiens is always already involved with the use of tools. And what he wants to say is that physiologically, the tool is absolutely essential to human evolution, because the evolution of hands and feet as physiological structures that allow us to walk upright and to manipulate tools depends on an ability to make the tools that we use increasingly sophisticated. And in using those tools, we become cognitively more developed. So there's an idea that the physiology of human beings is dependent on tool use, the way we develop as upright beings who are able to use tools with our hands. This is a result of tool use, and the fact that we become more clever, that our frontal lobe, our cerebral cortex develops, we become corticalized, depends on the interaction that we have with the tool. Now that means that the structure of being there that Heidegger talks about evolves in relation to, or has evolved in relation to, this anthropology of tool use, this evolutionary anthropology of tool use that Stiegler talks about. Now, the importance of this is when Heidegger writes about technology, he's talking about something that is external to us. And in a sense, technology enters into the equation of Heidegger's philosophy as something that is threatening. In the essay, The Question Concerning Technology, you know, the evolution of technologies such as nuclear power, etc., that have this kind of profound effect on nature and on human society are a threat, because they threaten this kind of capacity that we have to be authentic beings, to be kind of to exist in its kind of individualized sense of looking after and being responsible for our own existence and trying to constitute meaningful relationships with other human beings. The kind of technological society that grows up in the 1950s that he sees emerging around him is an exemplification of a technological enhancement of the they self of Mid-Side. And it's threatening. It's something which threatens the vocation of human beings to look after their own souls, to look after their own being, to make sure that they live these kind of authentic existences. Now, you know, as I'm sure you're aware, there is a kind of darker side to Heidegger's writing, which suggests that, you know, it's kind of anti-modernist, and this kind of anti-modernist, anti-technological attitude that he has is something that did lead to this connection with Nazism that he had in the 1930s. So there is this kind of thing in play around Heidegger, which is this kind of almost nostalgic idea about trying to reconstitute an existence which is authentic, which is outside, but which in a sense is outside of these kind of technological relationships. Stiegler, however, wants to maintain that we are always already technological. We never were anything completely independent of technology. There is no state of nature in which human beings were not technological. This is important for him because what it means is that we as human beings are always, our history has always been a history that has evolved in relation to the object. There's always been a history that is involved in relation to the technological object. What he wants to argue is that from the use of sharpened flintstones, you get the emergence of more complicated things like spears and arrowheads, and that there's a whole kind of historical development in which the evolution of technologies is an ongoing process that happens, which is driven by the process of corticalization that technology produces in us, but which also is driven by the fact that the objectification of that process of corticalization, of our becoming more intelligent, leads to new forms of technology. So there's this kind of constant relationship that evolves between human beings as intelligent, reflexive beings and the evolution of the technological systems that they inhabit. But the thing with this history is, and this is why he's obsessed with this idea of the myth of Prometheus, the god who was punished for stealing fire from the gods. The reason Prometheus is punished is because what he does is to give human beings, which is something that is simultaneously beneficial and tragic. It benefits human beings. It allows them to survive, it allows them to prosper, it allows them to exert a degree of power over nature and over other species, but it also is something whose development has a certain autonomy to us, which has a certain threatening element to it, which we are only partially able to control. And so there's a sense then that for Stiegler, we exist in relation to technologies that become increasingly intelligent on their own. The place where we've got now, the place that we've arrived at, is a place where digital information, artificial intelligence technologies are becoming increasingly autonomous. And that is something which is a threat. It's something that is associated with the decay of human culture. It's associated with the emergence of a politics of stupidity. It's associated with the emergence of societies from which the symbolic bonds of obligation are increasingly decayed. it's emerged. It's something that has produced this condition of stupidity that is related to the appeals that fascist movements are able to make, which are always based on kind of simplistic mythology rather than upon reflection, rather than upon the demands of justice, the demands of hospitality towards others, etc. This kind of sophisticated life, which Stiegler calls spirit, is something which is increasingly at risk from the kind of digital information technologies that have evolved in over the last 20 or 30 years. And that's really what I want to say a bit more about, you know, this idea about the relationship that human beings have, what he calls an organological relationship between technology and human beings that has emerged in the last 20 or 30 years with the emergence of the digital paradigm. And so that's what I want to say a little bit about now. So Stiegler is, I mean, in general, the whole kind of tradition of French critical theory that emerged in the 1960s with Derrida, with Baudrillard, with Deleuze and Guattari, have a kind of ambivalent relationship to Marx and Marxism. You know, I mean, there's, I think it's Spectres of Marx. Derrida says one can never read enough Marx, and then proceeds to completely deconstruct and just almost kind of try to overturn most of the kind of attempt to produce a science of capitalism that Marx talks about. But there's always been an element of respect there. There's always been an element of trying to preserve something of Marx's critique of capital. And it's the same with Stiegler. I mean, there is certainly an element of respect for Marx's attempt to engage with technology and its relationship to capitalism. It's just that what he wants to do is to suggest that capitalism has entered into a very different phase from the one that Marx described in firstly the Grundrisse and then in the volumes of Capital that he wrote after that. So I just want to say a little bit about that. So Marx's original formulation of the relationship between technology and capitalism, or perhaps more accurately, technology, capitalism, and the proletariat, is one that suggests that capitalism is an essentially technological system, especially after it's moved from mercantile capital to industrial capital based on machine production. He wants to argue that basically the competitiveness of a capitalist market means that as more and more firms enter into a particular branch of production, what that does is to institute a race whereby each firm will try to use technologies to produce more of a particular product in order to be able to maximize the profits that they can make from flooding the market with these kind of with the products that they produce. But what Marx wants to argue is that this is something which precipitates the crisis of capitalism, because it leads to overproduction and underconsumption. If you start to flood the market with commodities which you are able to produce incredibly quickly by using new technologies, eventually you run out of people who are able to afford to buy them. So the market gets ruined by the fact that it's been flooded with these kind of increasingly productive technologies. So that's one element. The other element is that technology, as Marx puts it, is fixed capital. So it doesn't produce value in itself. What it does is just speed up the process by which workers can produce value, can produce commodities. And the fact is that eventually the competition that exists between different capitalist institutions becomes so intense that you never get the value back from machines that you buy. You can only keep them for so long because somebody else buys something better, which means that you're no longer competitive, which means that you have to spend more money on buying a new machine. You didn't get the value from the last one, you won't get the value from this one you just bought, And again, this feeds into this crisis of overproduction and underconsumption. And so technology is part of this inevitable collapse of capitalism that Marx talks about. Now, the Frankfurt School, particularly Adorno, suggested that actually what culture industries do as they emerge in late capitalist societies is to provide some degree of a solution to this problem, in the sense that firstly, technologies make late capitalist society incredibly productive, incredibly wealthy. And so that in itself is something that begins to stave off this crisis of overproduction and consumption. But the other facet of that is this idea that culture industries make us into these kind of mindless consumers who will happily consume everything that's put in front of us. So the culture industry thesis, as Horkheimer Adorno originally formulated, was around film technologies. And basically the process of emulation, seeing film stars up there and wanting to wear the suit, to drink, smoke cigarettes, drive the car, whatever, is something that gets us to become these kind of consumers who are obsessed, whose desire is engaged with buying the commodities that are put up on the movie screen. And this goes some way to setting off, to staving off this process of overproduction and consumption. Because if you have these kind of hyper consumptive subjects who are always wanting to buy these things, then that goes some way to absorbing these kind of massive commodities that get produced by capitalist enterprise. So in a sense, the culture industry, well, not in a sense, the entire raison d'etre of the culture industry is to produce these patterns of consumption and conformism that keep the whole edifice of capitalism afloat. And what Stiegler wants to argue is we've entered a new phase of this, one that is far more intense. And what he wants to argue is that, and this is in a sense an extension of Jean Baudrillard's ideas that around a hyperreality, is that digital technologies and the kind of virtual environments that they allow us to provide are utterly immersive. This is what he means by the hyper-real. Reality is actually staged for us by these kind of virtual technologies. We're plugged into systems that stage reality for us and stage it in a way that means that we are completely consumed by it. And the fact that we inhabit these environments means that we change fundamentally as human subjects. There's an idea that we are constantly stimulated to consume the objects that are placed in front of us, and that the virtual systems in which we move are informed by artificial intelligence technologies that anticipate our desire. So the ideas around things like cookies, the notion that you buy one thing, and then there are a whole variety of other things that the AI systems, the algorithms that are part of the consumption process now, present a whole raft of other stuff that we think that the system thinks that we would want to consume. And in Baudrillard's terms, he says the system comes to think us. Now, Baudrillard is writing on the cusp of this transformation from analogical to digital systems. What Stiegler is saying is that these systems have become so immersive that they have completely transformed us. Our capacity for reflection, our capacity for judgment, our capacity for self-control and restraint has been really fundamentally eroded by systems which constantly keep us in a state of anticipation for what comes next. What can we buy next? What is there for us next? And this is something which is, for Stiegler, this erosion of the symbolic culture of late capitalist societies is something which is an incredibly serious problem. And he describes it as a form of decadence. He describes it as something where we become individuals who are constantly pursuing our own satisfaction. constantly lack any kind of mediated desire, which finds its satisfaction in things like hospitality to others, things like the fulfillment of justice, things like trying to do things for other people that don't actually mean that you benefit, other than the sense of satisfaction you get from it. And that's always, for him, that's always been part of the concept of the idea of democracy, is this notion of a certain openness to other people. Well, there's an idea that now what we've got is a society of autotelic individuals who just pursue their own wants and desires. And in a sense, there's an echo of something here that Adorno talked about. And I can never remember where this quote's from. It's either Minima Moralia or Negative Dialectics. He says that people who get swept up in this fetishized consumption are practically fascists, because what the idea is that they have become so abstracted from the cultural forms that orientate them towards other people, orientate them towards goals that aren't utterly self-serving, that the appeal of fascism becomes incredibly powerful. You know, this whole idea about me, about my exercising my rights over others is something that is a powerful part of the kind of appeals that fascist parties make, that extreme right parties make. And I'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so we've got an idea then about originary technicity and the way in which human beings grow up in relation to technologies. We've got an idea then about the way in which the relationship between capitalism and technology evolves, and the way in which technology has provided a solution to this kind of fundamental Marxist question about what is the relationship between capitalism and technology, and how is capitalism able to utilize technology to as a solution to the problems of overproduction and underconsumption. We've suggested that the situation that we're in now is something which is somewhat perilous, in the sense that human beings have become so overcapitalized that they are increasingly unable to make the kind of judgments and to participate in the kind of culture of democracy in a way that is restrained, in a way that is responsible, in a way that has a certain responsibility to ideal objects like justice, like legality, like hospitality and community. So we need to talk a little bit about about what this kind of politics of stupidity actually looks like. And I just want to make a few remarks about that. We've kind of moved on now from, not moved on, but we've come to a different phase in Stiegler's writing, which he really began after the publication of the last volume of volume 3 of Technics in Time, and it's the work that he did on symbolic misery. There are 3 volumes of this. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but there are 3 volumes on this idea of symbolic misery. And he also talks about this concept of the decadence of hyper-industrial societies. And this is the site, if you like, the place, the location of this politics of stupidity. So just try and flesh this out a little bit about what he means by that. As we know, Stiegler talks about the relationship that the evolution of human beings is an evolution that takes place in relation to the evolution of technological systems. So there's an idea that there's a certain momentum that is generated by the kind of technologies, the different regimes of technology that we have. So, you know, the transition from feudalism to capitalism, Marx acknowledges this to some extent. You know, there's a notion that he talks about the windmill and the handmill producing feudalist relationships between the feudal lord and the aristocracy. But as technological advances begin to happen, what happens is that this is a prefiguration of industrial capitalism. And eventually this kind of evolution of technological forces reaches a point where the old relations of production are completely ineffective. They just constrain what's possible, what has been made possible by new technologies. And that's part of the process by which the emergence of industrial capitalism happens at the end of the 18th century. And what Stiegler wants to suggest about this politics of stupidity is that the digital paradigm marks a kind of sea change, a kind of an accelerated revolution in the way that human beings relate to each other, because what they do is to stage reality for us. These technologies become a form through which reality is copied in such a way that it's almost indistinguishable from the real that exists outside us. And what he wants to suggest is that this has a profound effect on what we are as subjects. And he describes this in volume 1 of Symbolic Misery as the primacy of objective attachments. And this is something he takes from Sigmund Freud's work. Freud talks about the idea that the Oedipus complex that develops in the family is an unhealthy one, because it's this kind of fixation of desire of the boy child on the mother. And this is something that just appeals to the kind of primary drives of the child. There's no reflection there. It is just this kind of libidinal attachment to the mother. And the idea is that Freud puts forward is that in order for us to emerge as fully formed citizens who can form sexual relationships, erotic relationships with others outside the family, we have to destroy the Oedipus complex. And there's an essay that Freud writes about the dissolution of the Oedipus complex, about being the precondition for us becoming citizens in civil society. Well, for Stiegler, what's happened is those object attachments have come to dominate. The whole symbolic life, which is the presupposition of Freud's work on how we become civilized, the idea that our libidinal attachments, the idea that our desires become mediated through culture, through a symbolic culture, the ideas about the overvaluation of the other, romantic love, being something which moderate our sexual desires, pure libidinal desires. This kind of symbolic life that Freud just presumes as being there at the outside of the family, and having been produced by human civilization over the centuries, has been all but destroyed by the digital paradigm. That we inhabit a reality where we are solicited, our desires are solicited by this compulsion that is imposed upon us to consume. There's this idea that we live in perhaps what Baudrillard called a pornographic society, in the sense that our libidinal desire is constantly reopened by the kind of explicit sexual images that we can see in these kind of virtual reality situations that directly engage our sexual desires. So there's an idea that there's a threat to what Freud understood as the superego, the idea of a kind of moral subject who is able to restrain their desire. What this kind of new technology, this relationship between capital and digital technologies has done, is to threaten this restraint, is to threaten the economy of sublimation that underlies the political, moral, and ethical culture of democratic societies. So that's one part of this idea of a politics of stupidity, is the overcoming of the capacity that we have for sublimation, for symbolic attachment to our own culture, to ideals of justice and recognition. These are supplanted by this kind of constant provocation that we experience to consume and to satisfy our own desires. So it's accompanied by this idea of a loss of the symbolic, which Stiegler identifies with this concept of stupidity. All right, that's what he calls, this is what is the origin of this idea of stupidity. And what Stiegler wants to argue is that what's characteristic about democratic societies, the ideal of a democratic society is that it has certain concepts, ideas of justice, recognition, ideas about equality, ideas about community, hospitality, etc., that are forms of satisfaction in themselves. They're not the same as the kind of libidinal drives towards the consumption of sex and sexuality that he sees as having come to dominate civil society. It's a different form of noetic satisfaction. And this word noesis is something which is really important to Stiegler's work. It's this idea about reflection, about thinking about what your responsibilities are to others, what your responsibility is to your state, what your responsibility is to those who come to you in need, what your responsibilities are towards the general good of your society. And for him, this noetic attachment, this individuation through the consideration of these universal goals is something which again is starting to disappear from the civil society of Western democracy. And so there's an idea that, you know, that there's, again, some of his works on this are quite interesting because he talks about what the effect of that's been on us. You know, and he talks about things like, you know, high risk sports. And people get involved in doing this kind of things like bungee jumping and white water rafting and stuff like that, as forms of trying to seek satisfaction, of trying to get the thrill, the adrenaline hit. Well, for him, the proliferation of these things is a test to the fact that we just don't have the kind of fundamental intrinsic satisfactions of civic life that older forms of democracy had. And that this what he calls it parasuicidal behavior is characteristic of a kind of endemic stupidity that has taken hold in Western democratic societies. And this then links up to what I was saying about the relationship between decadence, stupidity, and the emergence of the far right. Because what he wants to argue is that this kind of subjectivity that really only responds to its drives, that is practically a fascist, as Adorno put it, that this kind of subjectivity is something that has a disposition, a tendency to be attracted to this kind of politics. Because, you know, one of the great things about fascist parties is that they are parties of mythology. You know, they provide easy solutions to things. You know, the ultimate anti-fascist gesture is to actually start thinking about, well, what are the economic factors that bring immigrants to Western European countries? Why are they there? Why are they being paid such low wages? Why are they subject to these regimes of hyper-exploitation? Why is there such an allergy amongst Western societies to non-white people who come to their borders? So, you know, the idea about reflection on things like justice, cosmopolitanism, all of the things that Stiegler associates with spirit, is this kind of ultimately anti-fascist gesture, whereas fascist politics is concerned with the mythology, the idea of actually mobilizing people's hatred for the presence of certain others in their country, in their state. And so there's this idea that the new forms of fascist politics that are starting to reform in Europe, in Germany, in Italy, in France, etc., are this mythological response that appeals to people at the level of desire, not at the level of noesis. They are these simplistic mythologies that simply appeal to the very lowest form of desire, the kind of decadent desire that Stiegler describes in his account of political stupidity. And for him, this is what has allowed the re-emergence of fascist politics around explicitly racist themes, even in the continent where the Holocaust happened. You know, this idea of a biopolitical racism that plays around the edges of these new kind of rules that have become part of the political mainstream in France, in Germany, and in Italy. And also in other countries like Hungary, you know, they've all got some example of this type of neo-fascist politics. Okay, so as I said, Stiegler's work is interesting because what he, in a sense, it is this kind of diagnosis of what's happened to democracy in Western societies as a result of this kind of digital paradigm, and how it has constituted the kind of radical erosion of political culture and the life of the spirit. And spirit is a really important concept to Stiegler, because while he's a materialist, he wants to suggest that human beings are capable of a spiritual life, which is profoundly influential on the way that they live. Because for him, human beings are always already within the ambit of the object, of the technological regimes that they inhabit. And this has some very specific consequences for what he understands as the possibility of trying to mobilize what is essentially a kind of anti-fascist sentiment in those democracies. What Stiegler wants to argue is that his technological systems are what he calls pharmacon, or are a pharmacon. And he takes this word from Plato, and it denotes this idea that the pharmacon is something which has a dual aspect to it. It's the poison and the cure at the same time. It's simultaneously the poison and the cure. And so we can see the poisonous element of these kind of digital systems, virtual reality systems, is that they threaten this radical erosion of political culture, the rise of mythologized politics, which is essentially racist, which is biopolitical, which threatens the racialization of civil society in Western democracies. However, he also wants to argue that the cure is there at the same time, because what he wants to argue is that these systems always produce a certain trauma in those who are subjected to them. And there's an idea that there is trauma which is visited upon those who live within those societies, immigrant populations, guest workers, all those who come to those societies but aren't necessarily recognized as being part of them. But it's not just that. It's also the fact that these kind of digital technologies and the satisfactions they offer are never adequate. You know, there's an idea that the way in which these technologies have been used as a process, a tactic of capitalization, has resulted in a variety of new forms of impoverishment, new forms of hyper-exploitation, like the gig economy, for example, the idea that no one has a permanent contract of employment anymore. You know, that increasingly large numbers of people just work as and when the work becomes available, doing the most solidly proletarianized jobs and forms of employment that you can imagine. And so this system is not completely hermetic. There are always elements within it that are radically traumatized. There are always human beings who emerge as a kind of residue of this kind of hermetic system of exploitation, entertainment, and engagement. And so what we're left with is this idea that the Arts Industrialis project that Stiegler engages with, founded in 2004, is the attempt to give people the capacity to express this trauma, this individualizing trauma, within the kind of digital and virtual reality systems that we now exist within. There's an idea that a new art could emerge, a new digital form of art, a new art of process, a new art that reflects the kind of trauma that human beings undergo within these systems, these technological systems, reflects the kind of downside, the negative side of this constant technological innovation, this constant capitalization of human beings. So the Ars Industrialis project is an attempt to try and vitalize a kind of public art, a protest, a way of expressing the trauma that each of us feels in a way that solicits contributions by other people, so that you get the emergence of a kind of public art as a gesture against this kind of totally overwhelming destruction of culture, and also as a kind of anti-fascist culture which tries to respond to the plight of other people. And what this is really is an art of spirit. It's the art of the spirit. It's an attempt to try and provoke gestures that allow us to express our humanity within these kind of systems that threaten to overwhelm our culture and our humanity. There's an idea that it is a gesture of spiritual vitalization within the machine, within the mechanics of capitalization that happens through these kind of digital and information technologies that have become dominant now, the dominant paradigm of production. Okay, I think I've probably spoken for around about an hour now. What I'll do then is I'll just finish off by saying a little bit about Stiegler's legacy. Some just very brief remarks about Bernard Stiegler's work, how it's been received, and the kind of contribution that he's made to this style of French critical theory. For me, I think the most interesting thing about Stiegler's work is clearly this notion of originary technicity. And for me, the reason that it is so interesting is because it invokes an idea of exactly what conservatism is. It's certainly not a kind of conventional party political espousal of conservatism, which seeks to preserve the kind of conventional forms of sublimation and the conventional forms of gender and sexuality, etc., as bulwarks against the pluralization of identity, bulwarks against the effects of digital culture. I don't believe that's true, but it does float this question of what is it, what do we need to hold on to in order for there to be some form of viable civic culture and ethical life in our societies? You know, it's opening up the question of exactly what do we need to hold on to as human beings if there is to be a viable ethical and political life that isn't just overwhelmed or swamped by these kinds of new digital and information technology. And that seems to me to be an incredibly contemporary question, especially in virtue of how new technologies are becoming increasingly self-activated and do actually bring up the question of what our relationship to those technologies will be in the short to medium term. So there is a really interesting question of what constitutes conservatism in a time when our identity as human beings is being threatened by our immersion within these kind of technologies. There's another question that he brings up, where I went to a conference years ago now, where there was a grad student who gave a paper who was an accelerationist, and again I think there's I think you'll obviously be aware of that kind of that type of social theoretical position, which suggests that the only way out of our current predicament in terms of things like global warming and climate change is to invest very heavily in technological production so that we can develop mega technologies that will allow us to overcome the worst effects of global warming, climate change, planetary and environmental despoliation, etc. We need to invest and we need to push those technologies on. And I remember he said that what Stiegler's work amounts to an avuncular warning to slow down. That he's just saying we just have to slow down. We need to put a brake on technological innovation to make sure that we survive as a species. And again, I don't think that's true. I think that's something that completely misses the subtlety of his arguments. You know, he has never been, the whole idea of originary technicity is that we can't possibly avoid the consequences of our being originally related to the development of technologies. That's what we are fated to. And so I don't think that's what he means. I think it's a question of constantly trying to rethink the relationship between human beings and the evolution of technology, not just to say we need to stop at this point. And I think, you know, that it's a much far more subtle provocation of having to think through the consequences of technological evolution than simply saying slow down. There's another criticism, I suppose, that's been leveled at him, and some advocates of Derrida's work want to suggest that this is the case. The suggestion is that his philosophical anthropology, in placing us into this specific relationship with technology, amounts to saying that in the end, noesis and spirit will disappear. Because in the end, if we become subject to technological processes that seem to be able to infinitely absorb trauma, infinitely absorb the experience of destitution, etc., into processes of simulation, then in the end, what's going to happen? The object will come to dominate us completely. And there will be no room for any kind of noetic thought or spirit. You know, Derrida's position was always that the originary formation of human subjectivity comes through this relationship between speech and writing, and it's this which gives us a sense of subjectivity, individuation, and autonomy. And Stiegler, by saying that the object is always already in there, setting up a position where we can't escape from the influence of technologies, and in the end we will disappear as a reflective, as a kind of reflective subject. And again, I have a certain sympathy for Stiegler's designation of things. I think that he's probably right about the urgency of the question of the degree to which technological systems can absorb us as aesthetic, as intuitive, as ethical and moral beings. And I think the way he frames the question is something which is extremely important, and something which will have a kind of continuing resonance. And so, yeah, I think for me, I think it occupies an important position now because of the way in which the prospect of extinction begins to haunt us all of us everywhere in the world. You know, we are one of the first generations to realize that actually around the corner could be some extinction level event if we don't actually do something about it. And I think Stiegler's later works on the Neganthropocene and his work on new political economy is extremely important in that respect. And I think for me, he provides an incredibly significant and important contribution to this style of French critical theory. Okay, I'll finish it there. Yeah, I'll throw things back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Abbinnett, for your insightful lecture. Now I open this session to questions and observation. Someone has asked a question in the chat box. You can see it yourself.
Okay, let's have a look.
Abbinnett, yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. A lot of the drift to the right that happened in the Republican Party in the US has been partly propelled by the relationship that Donald Trump had to the alt-right. And one of the ways in which the alt-right managed to solicit so much support was by the utilization of emojis and also other kind of symbols. One of them is this thing called Pepe the Frog, which were a kind of veiled invitation for people to post racist posts, to agree that it is their right as white citizens of the US to abuse people of color, to be quite frank about their kind of racist, dispositions. And I think that placing it in that sphere of triviality is something which is an incredibly powerful thing to do. You know, that level of trivialization and that way in which someone who is apparently involved in something that is ironic or trivial, actually, that's a very powerful way of getting people to forget about any kind of responsibility that they have, any kind of civic obligations, and move them towards this kind of absolute disregard for other people. So yes, I believe very much that is something that's very important.
Thank you, Dr. Abbinnett. Dr. Abbinnett, I have another question. This question is related to his Stiegler's another book you have just mentioned, the Neganthropocene. My question is, do you think that the Neganthropocene thesis seeks to depoliticize today's planetary crisis?
I don't think so. I think his idea about the neganthropocene. I mean, I can see what you're saying. Certainly, I mean, there is an element when you postulate the idea of a different epoch in that way. It's almost as if it's the presentation of a kind of speculative movement, that it's something that emerges as the next phase of the Anthropocene. You know, this idea, which the Anthropocene is something which is, you know, there is a sort of inherent optimism in it that suggests that technological solutions will be found to these kind of profound environmental problems and crises that we face. He's someone who never really agreed with that, because again, he doesn't think that technological solutions on their own will solve anything. But when he talks about the neganthropocene, what he's talking about is a certain process of individuation through which people come to recognize, through their own experiences of the kind of destructive nature of technologies on the environment, the absolute urgent necessity to respond to that, to move beyond kind of a kind of idiotic or stupid faith in the idea that technology will find a way. However, I can understand why you'd say that, because there, and this is something which is quite goes throughout his work, is that he doesn't say a massive amount about what kind of political organizations might be formed in relation to this concept of the neganthropocene. You know, he does talk a little bit occasionally about the formation of multitudes of people who who undergo the same kind of experience, but he is quite vague about that. I don't see, Candy, would you see, what's your opinion about that? Do you think that there is a depoliticizing kind of gesture on his part?
Thank you, Dr. Abbinnett. We have two more questions in the chat box.
Okay, so does not overcapitalization compel human beings to lose human essence? I think that's part of. I certainly think that's part of what he's saying, is that there is an experience of having lost something very profoundly human, in things like the work process, in things like the exercise of political rights in civil society, etc., etc. But I think for him, the actual process, the trauma that is caused to human beings by these processes of homogenization, integration, etc., is something which is itself potentially political, because it compels them to express the trauma that they feel. It compels them to undergo what he calls to produce an acting out of their trauma. And this is something which is very close to this idea of original technicity, I think, the notion that we never escape from the effects of technology, and it's that which can provoke some form of ethical and political response. And the other one was, thank you so much, was about India. Right, okay. So I know in India, now stop me if I'm wrong about this, but I know there's been a massive explosion in IT and technological IT technology in India. So I'd be quite interested to know what your kind of reflection on the effects that has had upon Indian society. Do you see this as, obviously this is a European, Stiegler is obviously a European philosopher, but do you see some of the effects being replicated in Indian society today?
Yes, Prof. Thank you so much for reflecting on this question. Obviously, from my perspective, what I would like to share is with respect to the immense IT boom in India that India has been experiencing for the past few decades. It obviously created a mixed impact, but why I raise this perspective also with respect to, obviously it has its positive and negative impacts, doubtless to say, but why I particularly also shared that your response in the context of USA also connects to the current scenario of the tremendous rise in right-wing sensibilities in the Indian way of habitual existence, not just in the political sphere, but also in our various ways of our habitual existence, is because we see that how technology is being used as a very strong tool of manipulation, of manipulating facts, of manipulating ideologies, of manipulating histories, and various other perspectives of our existence around us, just to achieve a set of self-centric, self-profiting goals. And obviously, when technology is used particularly for achieving these self-profiting, self-centric goals, which are widely harmful not only on the human civilization, but also equally on the natural environment and on all other living civilizations. And that makes me very skeptical about the whole paradigm of technological boom, which is usually presented with respect to all the discourses around us. This is generally presented in a very celebratory manner. But when we try to look beyond its physical appearance and try to look into its layers and sub-layers of its functional procedures, we see the hidden social dynamics, the power structures that underlie this whole paradigm of technological boom. So it is some of these factors that actually triggered me to share these perspectives with you, Prof.
So yeah, I was quite interested in this idea that you're talking about the manipulation of histories. Is that something that's become part of the kind of political process in India?
Yes, yes, very much, very much. In order to reflect on the perspectives of how the present, or widely, let's not just talk about the present, but widely how right-wing political ideologies that are centered on a particular religious community are superior than every other form of ideologies and knowledge systems. One of the many tools of propagating that in a very systemic way is distorting the existing historical narratives.
Right.
Is one of the many ways, yes.
And is that something that you think has been successful? It's been done as a successful political
very sadly, yes. Very sadly, yes. This whole manipulative project has been very successful, and it is being kind of infiltrated through the syllabus structures, through the pedagogies, through disciplinary patterns of teaching, learning in daily life. And unfortunately, very unfortunately, it has been very successful. And that is what is still very much generating that celebratoriness, if I talk about, of the right-wing regime in contemporary India.
That's really interesting and slightly depressing as well, because there's a real historical element to sort of right-wing politics in Europe at the moment, well, particularly in Britain as well. I mean, you know, the whole Brexit thing was a nostalgia for the British Empire and all that sort of rubbish. So yeah, I'm always very interested in the way that history gets represented in politics, and obviously for Stiegler, that's very much part of that sort of politics of stupidity thing.
Oh yes, right, Prof. Absolutely.
Dr. Abbinnett, Dr. Abbinnett, I have one more question. The question is, you have already talked about how the human and the techniques are co-constitutive and characterized by default of origin. Now, and it also gives a new form of life. So do you believe that are we always already transhuman?
Yes. I think that's part of why you can't simply understand him as being a conservative, because conservatives traditionally have always believed that our origin is from God or nature as created by God. And you know, all of the most profoundly influential conservative thinkers like Hobbes and Locke, also people like Boudin, and you know, the kind of classical utilitarian thinkers that are well, obviously not so much Locke, but clearly the kind of utilitarians who see the role of the state as being largely the maintenance of order, have always seen human beings as an expression of a divinely created nature. Well, he explicitly denies that. You know, I mean, he talks quite a lot about Rousseau's work as well, that state of nature, and how there is a pre-technological humanity. For him, we are always already transhuman, because the implication in the development of the object of technology is something that means that we have to be. We are, you know, the whole idea of the myth of Prometheus means that we can never rest. We can never rest happily in any historical epoch, because it's always moving forward, and there's nothing we can do about it. And that's what he means by, you know, the pharmacon. He means the idea that technology is both good and bad, and our future is transhuman. He wouldn't ever have wanted to deny that. It is transhuman. However, that question in itself gives rise to an equally difficult, a very difficult question to answer, which is, what do we want to conserve? What's worth conserving? And you know, that in a sense is the most persistent question right the way through his work. What is worth conserving? And how do we conserve it without lapsing into discourses about nostalgia, about, you know, how things were better before, etc., etc. So yeah, the future is transhuman, but not in an uncomplicated way.
Thank you, Dr. Abbinnett, for your answer. Now, I would request my colleague, Dr. Subhadeep Paul, to take up this session and give vote of thanks. Dr. Paul. Dr. Paul, please turn on your mic. It's not audible. Dr. Paul, are you having some trouble? Hello, Dr. Paul, we can't hear you. Dr. Paul, we can't hear you. Perhaps there is some.
I think he's on mute. He's on mute, I think.
Dr. Paul, you are not audible. You are not audible. Perhaps something is. Okay, he has lost connection. Yes, now we have reached the end of this session. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Abbinnett, for this insightful lecture. And I must say that it is your book on Stiegler actually made Stiegler's ideas accessible to English-speaking academia, particularly to me. It's a very well-read book, and I'm still reading this book with much pleasure. Now, I also believe that lecture of this kind does not have any formal end. It could go on and on. Of course,
Oh, absolutely.
yes, of course, we will be in touch with you in future. This is a kind of informal vote of thanks. I would like to thank Dr. Ross Abbinnett for taking time and making this lecture and inspiring us with his scholarship. I would also like to thank my colleague, Dr. Subhadeep Paul, and also our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Professor Devnaran Bandyopadhyay, and our Registrar, Dr. Saurabh Datta. So with this, I end today's session. Thank you, Dr. Ross Abbinnett. You always have a standing invitation. Whenever you will be able to come India, please inform us. We'll be very happy to receive you in person in our university. The Vice Chancellor has also said that, and I'm also saying this on behalf of the center. So you are most welcome. Thank you.
Before you go, thank you so much for this. It's been really great. I've really enjoyed it. It was lovely. And thank you for your welcome. It's just outstanding. Yeah, I've had a great time. Thank you so much. It's lovely. All the best. I will see you all very soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
See you later.